It's time for the movie rate, movie review, and tonight I'm going to talk about George Romero's Day of the Dead. Now, it does take place between these scientists and soldiers who are encamped in this old mining cave, which is a research facility / military outpost in a way. And they're trying to figure out how to get out of the situation, and they're trying to figure out what became to the situation, how this outbreak ever started. I want to start with the practical effects. Tom Savini basically added like 3 new layers in comparison to Dawn of the Dead, 3 new layers of gore effect, and really sold it in this film. Everybody looks like they went through a pandemic. Everybody who became a zombie really does look like a zombie, really does look like something bad happened, and I think it's just amazing how they look. They actually look like people. They don't look like these mutated, gunky looking, things that came out of the sewer, okay? A lot of other zombie films just never actually focused, like, what happened to a person, and in this case, in this movie, people who either got sick and became a zombie, and some of them either got injured from the wounds and the virus got into their body and they became a zombie, or half eaten. And I mean, for example, there is a zombie woman who holds her neck in the ordeal as if she was actually being bitten by a zombie, and she escaped, and she's like holding her wound, but the effect was pretty rapid for her, and she kind of just was stuck in that kind of moment, and here she is roaming around holding her neck as a zombie. And there's just so many different zombies in this film that it's really interesting to see what happened to these people, and it's tragic, but it's real, and Tom Savini really put that in effect. And I've seen quite a bit of zombie-based films, and none of them really touched actual realism, let alone like what would happen in a zombie apocalypse. And they mainly focused on the killing zombies aspect of things, and in this film it is not specifically based on that. This is about survival, and unfortunately so many zombie films are so less fixated on that, and it's really sad to see all these other films like that just don't really put that in effect. But back to this film, the effects is great, like from where being shot, as far as zombies getting shot, as far as a person getting shot. I love it. It looks just exactly, I mean, even when Captain Rhodes, played by Joe Pilato, when he gets shot in the gut by Bub, the zombie, you can clearly see like how it hits him. It really does show that wound, and it's gushing blood. It's not like exploding or anything like that. It's not being exaggerated, and it's real. It's like you get shot. This is basically how it's going to look when you get shot, or the effect of how it looks when someone gets shot, and not just try to sell it. Sell the gore to the audience. This is much more than just that. But in my opinion, this film really does fixate on survival, really does fixate how can one just simply survive alone. This is not a too dramatic type of film. And what I mean by that is that the characters between scientists and the soldiers are not really that relative between the two. You've got the military who just simply wants to get out of there. They don't care about research. They don't care what's really going on. They don't care about anything except for really themselves and having to just simply get out of there, just blow as Captain Roach would say, blow the piss out of them and get out of there. And unfortunately, in this situation, that's not going to happen. The characters wise, like, the scientists, they're trying to figure out what's making things happen, how it's happening. However, Dr. Logan, aka Frankenstein, is trying to manipulate the zombies in a way, trying to control them somehow, trying to make them behave as he says, and reward them for doing that. And he does get on a breakthrough by trying to tell the scientists what's going on and so forth. And I think that this makes this film unique when trying to tap into that. And I'm not saying that other films might have done something a little bit like that, but in this case, I will say that as far as humanly possible, this pretty much touches home. Like, could you possibly do this to a zombie? Is it possible? And again, this just adds another element to the survival aspect in a zombie apocalypse. But as we see throughout the film, what happens with Logan, which again, I will not spoil anything to the audience who have not seen this movie, or at least seen some of to that point. But I will say that it's interesting of how aggressive the elevation of the situation can be between the scientists and the military personnel. And I like the fact that it's not just over dramatic stuff and nobody, all this other blah 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 in between scenes. I mean, this is purely survival, and the best part of it is, like, they are just coping with the situation. They're not just being exaggerated, having to do something drastic. And as you would see on these other zombie films, like, you see girl getting all hysterical and this and that, but no, nobody's being hysterical in this, and I love it. And not only that, this is in the 1980s. Again, this is another period film, era film, which I really love the fact that this is shot in this. And I have nothing but really positive things to say about this film. I mean, this becomes a pinnacle as far as real zombie apocalypse type films. And George, who has been so well into writing this, and I'm amazed that he continued to do this with Day of the Dead, as the success of Night of the Living Dead, and then you got Dawn of the Dead, which again is another survival, people trying to survive and move on. Well, this is exactly the same way in Day of the Dead. It's to survive, and you don't know who's going to survive, you don't know who's going to betray or anything like that. But overall, I love the environment. I love the fact that they actually used the location and filming inside that cave, and it really does add something new. It didn't really give a suspense horror effect as you would see in Night of the Living Dead, which is like, as you see the darkness, as you see, some zombies kind of creep out of the darkness and this and that, that's suspense. But in this case, it's just simply like a day-to-day, because you see the scientists, whoever goes down in that cave to the corral, so to speak, and then gather up zombies for Logan to experiment on and try to figure things out. But back to the story, things just become increasingly difficult between the two, because we don't know if or when something might change in the effect of the zombie apocalypse, and that's like one of the biggest confliction between the story. And I think as far as the actors go in this film, everybody did a great job. Everybody, again, is not a A-lister, well-known type of actor in this film. And I'm a big fan of non-A-listers, and I'm not really saying that's a bad thing per se. It's not a bad thing. The fact that they didn't go for these big, top branded actors, because that eats up quite a bit of the movie budget, for one. In my opinion, these guys really nailed it. Joe Pilato really nailed the Captain Rhodes character, because Captain Rhodes is not a pleasant character. Definitely not a very cooperative character in some degree. And as we know, Joe Pilato also played in Dawn of the Dead, but he had a very minor role. He had a role, but it wasn't really in part of the story. They had to move along, so they kind of cut his role out, which you can find the Dawn of the Dead special box set. You can find out that, he actually had a much larger on-screen time in that film. But I appreciate the fact that he has a much bigger, much pinnacle role in this film, and he just nails it. And everybody else involved within his group under Captain Rhodes, they did such a great job. And they're kind of low-key characters, but I also love low-key characterization as well. You don't know what they're capable of. You don't know if they're important. You don't know if they're non-essential. You don't know what kind of characters they really are until something happens in the situation. And like Steel, for example. Steel, seems like he's just, like this big bully, kind of like an enforcer for Captain Rhodes. And it's all fun and games. And then as we see what happens with this character, he kind of has a slight compassion, but too late for that for him, as we would see it in the story. But again, the other locations, not just the cave. Back to the locations again, not just the cave, but the city. I like how the city looks as they fly over the city, which looks really decrepit over time. It looks like everybody who's been encamped in the military facility has been there for, my guess is, a couple weeks. Not a huge time frame as far as what's been going on in the situation. But I will say that the city, you can tell it's dead. You can tell that something really went through this place. The virus, the plague, whatever it is, really infected everybody. And it just seems like there's no hope. It gives you that sense of feeling there's no hope until, the scientists are trying to come up with some kind of a plan or something that would fix this whole situation, or if there's anybody left. But the thing is, they got to fixate on how they got to get out of there. And when there's no contact, that just adds a little bit more suspense on that as far as the emotional level. I just love the fact that this whole thing is just pure survival and its realness. And I love that adding Bub, the zombie, being a smart zombie, having to learn. That's another great effect too, that these zombies are not stupid. These zombies are not just mindless flesh eaters. They're learning things. They're like trying to find out where their memories have lost. It's like a lost and found with their mind as a zombie. They got fragments of memories or certain motor skills that they definitely remember how to do. Not just walking and grabbing and biting, but learning how to pick up an object and use it as a weapon. Even though they can't use that weapon as an effective weapon or effectively, they know what to do. They know, they have that primal instinct that they want something. And that's obviously to eat, which we clearly see. But having to pick up an item, having to push down a door, or having to learn to grab, have more than 1, 2, 3, or 4 people push something over, over time, they actually learn something. And now back to Bub, who is advancing how to learn, how to, remember how to shave. And in the scene where Captain Rhodes, is having a confliction with Bub in a way, Bub has an unloaded pistol that he aims at him, but he remembers, like, Captain Rose is a threat. He remembers how to use that gun. And so he tries to use that gun. Obviously, there's no bullets. And that's what makes this even more of a unique zombie-type film, is that we have zombies who are, in fact, learning very slowly. Like, they're relearning certain things very slowly, at a very slow pace. But some, like Bub, learning very advanced on certain things. And honestly, I give this film pretty much a 10 out of a 10, because I think this really stands out next to Dawn of the Dead, because Dawn of the Dead is a survival type film just like this one. But I like to see that Day of the Dead is a sequel that takes place, within a month or 2 months or maybe 3 months time after Dawn of the Dead. Now, that's just my assumption. I'm not saying that that's what this is, but I think it's interesting of where this film takes place and how these characters are trying to cope with each other without trying to kill each other, without trying to do anything. But obviously, as we watch the story, it does progress and does get aggressive. And I think it's a great movie. And as far as the composition, the score in this movie, I even love that too, because it's different, it's unique, and it really fits the mood and the moments when these characters are having a little bit of a down moment that aren't really interacting with the other characters. And I think John Harrison does a really good job with that. It doesn't have to be so upbeat, so scary, so energetic per se in this movie, just because it's a horror film. But this one just became kind of offbeat, kind of took a different route with the score itself. But it's a great score for this movie. I think it really fits it very well for it. So that is my critique on Day of the Dead. I think it's just great. It's a unique zombie film on its own, and surprisingly, it doesn't exhaust the zombie era as we're so used to, because so many zombie films out there are very cartoony. What I've noticed, they're very cartoony. They get the typical characters, the hero characters or whatever. They go out and they blow the crap out of all the zombies, and that's all it really is. It's all about the action rather than the dramatic aspect. And of course, you got a very well placed scenario as far as zombies. You got The Walking Dead, which had a lot of drama, a lot of emotion, a lot of power behind that. That's just one of the few good examples that when you take something like this in a dire situation, how can you perceive this dire situation without making it so stereotyped? And that's very hard. So other zombie films who just make a point A, point B, well, George Romero doesn't do that with his zombie films. It's like point A, point B, point C, and then maybe, to make it interesting, point F, point G, whatever makes it work, as far as to not just scare you, but to just make you wonder, okay, what's going to happen to these characters? And how is this going to happen? And where is this going to go? But that is my opinion on Day of the Dead. Let me know what you think about that. Do you think this film is definitely a top-tier zombie film of George Romero, or even a zombie film in general? Just leave a comment and let me know.